This is lecture English Gothic 3, the final section on English Gothic architecture. We'll take a look at Ely Cathedral, St. Mary Redcliffe in Bristol, the Divinity School at the Bodelean Library at Oxford, Christ Church, Oxford, both by William Orchard, and Bath Abbey in Bath by the brothers Robert and William Vertue. This is Ely Cathedral. It was dedicated to Saint Etheldreda, a medieval saint. It's founded in 673. It's a Benedictine church. Ely is in Cambridgeshire, just east of Cambridge, near the border of East Anglia in eastern England. Here's a view of the entrance and the tower, the crossing tower, hovering way up above. The cathedral, the Gothic cathedral, was built by masons from Lincoln. A lot of the details are very similar to Lincoln Cathedral. Lincoln is about an hour to the north. Go from Ely up to Peterborough, and then Southall, and then England, and then Lincoln and Lincolnshire. So you have a similar architectural vocabulary that you find on the facade of Lincoln Cathedral, with the Romanesque arcades and the round arches from the original Romanesque building, and the reticulation, the geometrical patterns like you find at Lincoln. In the vestibule at Ely, there's the overlapping syncopated arcades with the round arches set in trefoils, very similar to what you find in the choir of Lincoln, attributed to Geoffrey de Noyer. The portal into Ely is in the French Gothic style, decorated style with the excessive ornament. The nave at Ely is a Norman nave with Norman elevations, huge round columns, round arches, Springer poles going all the way up with a triforium and a clerestory, so kind of a mixture of Norman and French Gothic in the elevation. And then you have, instead of a vaulted roof, you have just a painted roof up above, and this is a view headed towards the crossing with the famous hammer beam vault by William Hurley, and then the choir vault beyond that in the decorated the choir, and then the retro choir. The retro choir is the Lincoln Tierceron vault, and the choir in front of that on the other side of the crossing is a Lierne star vault, a development of the Lincoln vocabulary. So there's the Norman elevation in the nave with the Springer poles going all the way up the elevation, but so obviously it was intended to have a ribbed vault with ribs springing from the Springer poles, but that never got built for whatever reason. Then this is the retro choir with the Tierceron Lincoln style vault, and the decorated style of elevations with the bundle columns, the multiple archivolts, and the ogival arches in the arcade, elaborate crocket style corbels and the spandrels with the Springer poles on top. Looks very similar to the angel choir at Lincoln, created right around the same time. And there's the choir vault, the Lierne star vault in the foreground, with the Tiercerons and the Liernes forming star patterns running down the ridgepole in the center, with elaborate foliate mosses with heraldic symbols on them, representing the families who contributed to the construction of the church. And then the background there in the retro choir, beyond the choir, is the Tierceron Lincoln style vault with the multiple Tiercerons joining at the ridgepole running down the center. There's a detail of the Lincoln style vault in the retro choir at Ely Cathedral with the gilded foliate bosses on the joints between the Tiercerons and the Liernes. The Tierceron and Lierne pattern is exactly the same as in the nave at Lincoln Cathedral, with the ribs springing from the corbels at the top of the Springer poles on either side. Then you can see the original brickwork in the Severies that at one point was painted over with plaster, but most of the plaster has faded away, and you can see the original brickwork. There's a detail of the Lierne Star Vault in the choir, a development of the Tierceron Vault with the stars formed by the Liernes running down the center. And the elevation in the retrochoir, the Lincoln-style elevation with a triforium with a gallery behind it, may have temporarily held prisoners during the Middle Ages for the ecclesiastical courts held in the cathedral. You can see the construction of the cathedral beyond the elevation there. As always, the elevation doesn't do anything structurally. It's just a scaffolding, deceiving your senses, as in the allegory of the cave. The scaffolding created by God of the material world. Then the clear stories up above with the 3 lancet windows, just like at Lincoln. And then the decorated style vaulting down below with the crocketed corbels, lots of sort of foliate decoration. Ely Cathedral has the largest chapter house in England. The chapter house and the Lady Chapel are designed by John Ramsay. There's the that's a Lady Chapel on the right there. It would have been originally brightly painted. It's filled with advanced English decorated style architecture, perpendicular style windows. There's a Lierne Star Vault, stone vault up above, with the Liernes forming star patterns with the bosses. Has the largest windows of any building in England. And then it has these elaborate pews down below carved out of stone. These are called nodding ogee arches. The ogee arch has the point in the center, an elaboration of the ogival arch, and then the ogee arches are repeated in trefoils underneath the nodding arch. There's a triangular pediment up above with the crockets running up and down the pediment, the flames, just like in the chapter house at Southwell-Minster. Then the spandrels are filled with all kinds of foliate decoration and relief sculptures showing scenes for the Bible. So incredibly intricate and complex carvings, sort of animated vocabulary forms from late English Gothic with the nodding ogee arches, the ogee arches nodding forward, creating a 3-dimensional space frame alternating with the columns and arches behind it there, just like at Lincoln. Very complex composition. Originally probably would have been painted, so it didn't have the same kind of appearance that it does now. The Lierne Star Vault up above in the Lady Chapel or Chapter House at Ely, with a ridgepole running down the center, the Tierceron ribs running up to the ridgepole, and then the Liernes forming the star patterns running up and down the ridgepole. In the crossing at Ely, you have an elaborate timber frame hammer beam vault designed by a monk, Alan of Walsingham, and executed by the carpenter William Hurley. William Hurley is the most famous carpenter in England in the Middle Ages. He also constructed the hammer beam vaults at the original Westminster Palace in London, which burned down and was replaced by the neo-Gothic Houses of Parliament at Westminster Palace, designed by Pugin later on. So this is all wooden vaulting at the crossing at Ely. You have wooden Tierceron vaults below. Then you have a wooden lantern. All of this supported by buttresses hidden behind the vaults, with a clerestory on the sides of the lantern, the octagonal lantern representing the Holy Spirit, and then figures from the Bible below the clerestory windows, and then in the vault in the ceiling of the lantern, a kind of a snowflake pattern reflecting the cosmology of the Middle Ages. I'm going to figure out where we are. So this is about in the 1320s. There's a detail of the snowflake pattern in the center. The celestial hierarchies are represented. The mystical hierarchies of Pseudo-Dionysus in the Middle Ages, Neoplatonic hierarchies. The seraphim is painted, a ring of seraphim, the bodiless angel is the closest angel to God, near the center there. Then the hierarchy of angels are painted on the vault, representing the mediation between the mind of man and God in the light mysticism of the Middle Ages, all present there in this elaborate wooden construction executed by William Hurley at Ely Cathedral in the 1320s. There's a chapels, or a chapel at Ely Cathedral at the very end of the Gothic period in England, around 1500, right around the same time as the beginning of the Renaissance in Italy, or the High Renaissance in Italy. So you have these extremely elaborate, imaginative variations of the Gothic vocabulary, with the spires and the crockets, like in French Gothic architecture. This almost looks more like something that Antonio Gaudí would have produced in his Modernismo style in Barcelona in the Art Nouveau in the 19th century than anything from the Middle Ages. Definitely a transitional work between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the Art Nouveau period in the 19th and 20th centuries. Almost has a surrealistic quality to it. This is St. Mary Redcliffe. It's in Bristol. It's the largest church in England, which is not a cathedral. It's a parish church. It was commissioned by Simon de Burton. Where is he in here? Yeah, Simon de Burton is the mayor of Bristol. He was elected to office 5 times in Bristol. Bristol was a thriving port city in medieval England. They had a lot of money. So this is the exterior of the building with the pier buttresses and the spire. There's details on the exterior showing the nodding OG arches and the pediments with the crockets and the burning bushes on them, like at Ely or Southall, and then the trefoil ogival arches above the portal there. The figures of biblical figures carved into the niches up above. And then in the vestibule, you have a snowflake looking vault in the ceiling with the tierceron ribs forming a star pattern in the center. The joints are covered with large gilded foliate bosses covering up the joinery. And then in the nave and the choir, you have perpendicular style vaults. In the nave in the foreground, you have the 3 ridge poles, like the 3 ridge poles in the nave at Tewkesbury Abbey. The nave in the choir, or the vault in the choir, is considered to be the first curvilinear style vault. So in the nave, you have it's a tierceron vault with the 3 ridge poles and some liernes and cusping inserted to give it a organic quality, large gilded bosses. Then in the choir, you have the curvilinear style vault, more curvilinear with the tiercerons leading into a center with no ridgepole, seeming to break apart into a pattern of diamonds formed by the liernes with lots of cusping, and the foliate bosses giving it a kind of a very naturalistic, looks like a thicket in the woods or something like that, corresponding to the nature philosophy of the Middle Ages, beginning with Robert Grosseteste, and the cosmology where the light becomes matter through geometries, and this all sits on top of very high clerestory windows with no triforium below, just some piers carved into the spandrels above the arches and the arcades. There's the Curvilinear vault and the choir at Bristol Cathedral with the cusping, the lierne patterns, and the tiercerons springing from the poles on either side. There's a detail of a crossing at St. Mary Redcliffe with more elaborate decorative vaulting styles. The curvilinear choir down below and the perpendicular nave style up above. And there's the perpendicular style nave vault with the 3 ridge poles and the cusping and the gilded bosses. Again, the high clerestory windows and no triforium in the elevation. There's the vault again. There's a transept vault at St. Mary Redcliffe with another variation of this combination of the perpendicular vocabulary elements as developed from Lincoln Cathedral with the liernes and the tiercerons. There's aisle vaulting at St. Mary Redcliffe, incredibly elaborate thicket of architectural vocabulary elements. You feel like you're walking into a different world when you walk into these kinds of buildings. In the Middle Ages, all lovingly restored during the Victorian period, painted, lots of money spent on lighting. The English cathedrals have spent lots of money in restoration, which makes them expensive to visit. It even makes them expensive if you're a member of the congregation, which they complain about a lot in England. But the result is incredible architecture. So in Oxford, you have the Divinity School and Christ Church vaults, both designed by William Orchard. This is the Bodelean Library at Oxford University. It's the largest research library in England. It houses a lot of the original manuscripts of Robert Grosseteste. So I spent a lot of time there doing research, made several trips. It's mostly Gothic perpendicular style architecture. The building in the background is the Radcliffe Camera, the famous building from the Renaissance period by James Gibbs, with the House of Raphael motif, the rusticated arcaded ground level, and the ornamented piano nobile, an icon of the Roman Renaissance with the balustrade from Michelangelo on top, and then the round dome in the center. It's a library. It's a round library. It's the largest round library in England. It's called the Camera. Camera means room in Latin. So there's the Radcliffe Camera next to the rest of the complex of the Bodleian Library. This appears in all kinds of movies and television shows. It's probably the most photographed backdrop in all of England. The entrance to the Bodleian Library with the Gothic style ogee arch above the door there, and the 4-centered arch below that. And then the famous, what was a library, the Divinity School at the library by William Orchard, actually a meeting house from 1478 to 88 in Oxfordshire. So William Orchard creates these extremely imaginative pendant vaults. The Pendant Vault first appeared in the Chantry Chapel at Tewkesbury Abbey and is developed by William Orchard here. This is when I toured England in the summer of 2009. This is the only building that I had to get written permission in advance to photograph. So I was able to do that in my trip to Oxford. So you have the huge ribs crossing the vault, separating the bays. And then in the vault itself, you have these elaborate tierceron and lierne patterns with the tracery in between the ribs and the elaborate bosses with the heraldic symbols on them. And then the pendants formed, 2 in each bay, with the ribs in a cone shape falling from the ceiling, culminating in a kind of a corbel hanging from the pendants. So this is what you would expect to find on the top of a column in an umbrella vault, but here there's no structure underneath it. It's just hanging from the ceiling, defying any kind of structural logic and creating an extremely elaborate composition of these vocabulary elements that originated in Lincoln and developed into these fan vaults and pendant vaults in the late Gothic period. We're in, what's the year here? Divinity School, 1488, so we're already in the High Renaissance in Florence by now. Lots of windows letting the light in. There's a detail of the vaults at the Divinity School at the Bodelean Library by William Orchard. And then not far away on the campus of Oxford University is the Tom Quad and Christ Church on the Tom Quad at Oxford. This is was originally the building on the left. The church was originally an Augustinian abbey. It was made a cathedral by Henry VIII when he established the Anglican Church and the Anglican cathedrals. There's an entrance into the Tom Quad, some vaulting in the passageways around the Tom Quad with the thick ribs and the heraldic symbols. Then this is the interior of the Christ Church on the Tom Quad, also by William Orchard, same mason that designed the vault at the Divinity School. So you have a Norman elevation from the original Augustinian Abbey with the thick cylindrical columns, the round arches on top of them, then the short springer poles and the spandrels and the arches, and the triforium with the clerestory level above. Some intersecting arches below the rose window there, the rose window being a symbol of Mary, the intersecting arches borrowed from Islamic architecture. Then up above you have these huge bundles of columns springing from the springer poles that sort of run into a pendant hanging down on each side, and so you have a kind of a half of a fan and half of a pendant with a corbel hanging from it, and then the ribs of the pendant intersect with lianes, forming patterns on either side of the ridgepole running down the center. So very odd, bizarre composition. The pendants defy any structural logic. The different elements sort of are truncated and intersect with each other, defying any kind of compositional logic. So it's a very bizarre kind of architecture as a kind of a culmination of this weird, irrational strain that you find in English Gothic architecture, which historians like to say expresses a characteristic of the English, that there's a little bit of insanity running underneath the surface. There's a detail of the thick ribs with the cusping on them, the liane patterns, the brick severies that are visible. They haven't been painted over. The bundles springing from the corbels and the springer poles, which are really huge cylinders themselves. So all very bizarre variation on the vocabulary. There's some faces at the bottom of the springer poles, at the bottom of the severies or the spandrels between the arches there. There was a mathematician, a professor of mathematics at Oxford named Charles Dodson, who attended Mass in this church every Sunday for 40 years of his life. He wrote important treatises on mathematics. He also wrote 2 books using the pen name Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. He made money on the side as a nanny for children, and so he wrote these stories for the children that he was taking care of. Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass are famous for presenting a reality that's turned upside down, as experienced by Alice in her dreams, where everything is the opposite of what you would expect in an alternative reality. I can't help but think that if Charles Dodgson, aka Lewis Carroll, attended Mass in this room every Sunday for 40 years of his life, that the architecture didn't have something to do with inspiring him to write these stories about realities turned upside down in Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, where everything is the opposite of what you would expect, exactly as it appears in the architecture. So just a theory, who knows? Finally, in English Gothic architecture is Bath Abbey in Bath, a beautiful town in Somerset. The abbey was commissioned by Oliver King, the Bishop of Bath. It's carved out of Bath stone. It was lovingly restored by Sir George Gilbert Scott in the Victorian period. George Gilbert Scott was knighted for his restoration work in the Victorian period. He was also a Gothic revival architect. His son Giles Scott is responsible for designing the red telephone booths in England, almost none of which exists anymore. So this is the Abbey in Bath. The perpendicular style exterior with the spires and the cusping, the perpendicular style windows, and then the vaults on the interior are filled with the finest fan vaults in England, designed by the Vertue brothers, William and Robert Vertue, who also designed vaults in Windsor Castle for the royal family. So this is 1504 to 18. So we're in the 16th century already. This is the final work of English Gothic architecture. So you have very finely carved, intricate tracery. You have really high clerestory windows, lots of light coming into the interior, springer poles running up the side, really tall conoid bundle columns of tiercerons, lots and lots of tiercerons forming the cones, the severies connected, forming the epigenetic surface, like in an epigenetic landscape, the undulating surface. And then the cusping carved in the tracery, and then the tracery and the spandrels in between with the quatrefoils, all very fine, delicate carving, contributing to these amazing fan vaults at Bath Abbey by the Vertue brothers. So this is the nave. The painting in the Severies is by Sir George Gilbert Scott from the Victorian period, so appears slightly different from how it would have appeared in the Middle Ages. Then variations of the fan vaults and the transept and other parts of the abbey. Here with the elaborate tracery and the Severies between the fan vaults. Here there's pendants in between the fans in the Severies, reflecting the architecture of William Orchard at Oxford, with quatrefoils and elaborate carvings and the tracery in between the ribs and the tiercerons. This is a remodeling of the King's Cross terminal in London, the vestibule at King's Cross, the old Gothic Revival building, given a remodeling, using these vaults that were modeled on the vaults at Bath Abbey. So here's an example of a direct application of the English Gothic architecture from the Middle Ages being applied to contemporary architecture. This space frame created like a pendant vault or a fan vault with the tubular steel, and then lots of new stores and restaurants down below. All of it added on to the existing building at one of the first train stations in London, King's Cross, which is the train station that I would go to get on the train to go up to Lincoln after I'd arrived in London. I had no idea that this was being built, so I arrived here. It had been about 2 years, and I walked into this, and I had no idea where I was. I couldn't believe that I had walked into something. I had no idea they had redone this, so it was quite a surprise. but it's very there's great restaurants. Prezzo is a good restaurant. W.H. Smith down below there. It's like you can buy stuff there to take with you on the train. There's the original building behind the space frame there. So you can see how they left the original building intact and used this ribbed vaulting technique to build the space frame around it to house the new amenities for the cathedral, using the structure from the vaults at Bath Abbey that were modeled on computers at the school in London, the Architecture Association, with their advanced computer modeling programs, were able to produce this for the remodeling of King's Cross Station. There's a view through the space frame into the Renaissance and Gothic revival brick structure of the original King's Cross Station. I always really enjoy going through here around Christmas time because there's always choirs singing Christmas carols, and it's a really festive time. There's the exterior of that new vestibule at King's Cross on the left. On the right is St. Pancras Station. Trains from St. Pancras go up to Liverpool and places like that in Western England. So these are two of the main transportation hubs in London. They're the Midland Grand Hotel by Sir George Gilbert Scott sits in front of St. Pancras Station, and it's just down the street from the British Library and University College London, in the center of London. Here's some views of Bath. Bath is famous for its Roman baths. It was a Roman colony. Some of the best preserved Roman baths are at Bath. So Bath has always been a favorite destination for the royal family, taking a vacation from Windsor Castle outside of London to go up to Bath to take advantage of the Roman baths. There's the old Roman bath in Bath. Bath is also known for the Royal Crescent, with the crescent-shaped apartment buildings. It's a beautiful countryside in this part of England. Whenever I go there, it reminds me of Italy, with the lush vegetation and the soft limestone that the buildings are built out of. So with Bath Abbey and the fan vaults and pendant vaults by the Vertue brothers, and the pendant vaults by Will Orchard of Oxford, that concludes the three sections on English Gothic architecture. So the next section is on Italian Gothic architecture.